Hey, this is John Lee Dumas, the founder and host of Entrepreneurs on Fire. And if you're wanting to learn how to embrace change and navigate through disruption as a leader, then listen to the Leadership is Changing podcast with my good friend, Denis Gianoutsos. He's prepared to ignite.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos.
Hey, the show here is called Leadership is Changing, and I know you and I have talked about this before, but leadership is changing. What does it mean for you?
Leadership is changing. And the reason why I think that is because we used to live in a world where there were just gatekeepers for everything. You wanted to be in the movies, like you had to go through the gatekeepers in Hollywood. You wanted to be a singer, you had to go through the gatekeepers and fill in the blank of whatever record studio label was big at the time. Like you wanted to be in finance, you had to go through a couple of the biggest firms. That's all gone now. Like all of these old white, crinkly gatekeepers that used to exist, by the way, old white male crinkly gatekeepers that used to exist, they're all gone. Their time is gone. They're dinosaurs. The reality is now you can be anybody, anywhere who says to yourself, I am going to solve one problem better than anybody else in the world. And that one problem can be very minuscule, tiny, and niche. And by the way, the more niche, the better. And you are going to be able to make it. And by make it, you're going to be able to build a raving fan base for people that are like, thank the Lord that there is somebody out there that is solving my specific problem in a very specific, direct, and high quality way. Like back in 2012, that's all that I did. I saw that nobody was solving the problem of releasing a daily podcast, interviewing a successful entrepreneur. I stepped into that space. I solved that problem. I did it for 2,000 days in a row. I was not a good podcast host. I didn't know what I was doing. I stumbled along in the dark, but I figured things out as I went through. Because guess what, Dennis? The day I launched, I was the best daily podcast host in the world, interviewing entrepreneurs. I was the worst daily podcast host interviewing entrepreneurs. I was the only daily podcast host interviewing entrepreneurs. How can you, listeners, become the only?
Yeah, cool. The only. And John, I think that's something that I see with a lot of people, whether they're in leadership roles, or entrepreneurs, business owners, whatever it is. A lot of them procrastinate. They tend to not just do anything. And I think what you're just sharing there about the fact that if you go out there and do it, it's never going to be perfect. But you've got to start somewhere. Any tips for anyone about procrastinating or just getting on with it? Any thoughts?
Listen, procrastination is what every human being does because it's easier to procrastinate. And we want to go towards the easier. We want to relieve pain. We want to increase pleasure. That's what we do as human beings, relieving pain, increasing pleasure. That's what we do. And guess what procrastinating is? That is relieving pain, or that is increasing pleasure. It's doing both of those things at once because you're not doing the hard work that it's going to take. So if you want to continue to live a life of quiet desperation, if you want to continue to have to grind away, making other people rich, if you want to continue to live a life where you're having to follow other people's orders, then keep procrastinating. But if you actually want to take your life's bull by the horns and steer that bull in the direction that you want it to go and create a life of financial freedom, of location freedom, it starts by saying, you know what? I know I don't want to do this, but I have to do this. I need to stop the procrastination. I need to stop trying to be perfect, and I just need to do it. Every master was a disaster. You need to be open and willing to be a disaster and just start and just go and just drive forward. That is the focus.
Yeah, nice. Every master was a disaster. Team, listeners, it's never going to be perfect. Just go for it. And John is sharing that with us. Here's a question for you, and it's an interesting one in the sense that you probably have many, but I think who's your favorite leader and why? Now, this person can be alive or from history, but who is that person?
My grandfather. God bless his soul. My grandfather, I was born and raised in Bosnia, Sarajevo, former Yugoslavia, and many of your listeners will recognize some of the tragic and troublesome history we had, on top of having wonderful people and great historical sides and beauty. So my grandfather was a very pivotal person in my life and my upbringing. I was 4 or 5 years old, and we would open our mornings with playing a party of chess. Afterwards, we would do a lesson on a particular topic: philosophy, logic, geography, history, politics. I was being asked how to solve some of the issues in the Middle East when I was 5 years old. I felt that was very normal, and I felt every single little girl had this conversation with her grandfather. I had to recognize where New Zealand is on the card and on the map. And I was also I had some numbers on the industry that New Zealand is known for. Yet again, I thought that was very normal. When I turned 7 years old, when I started going to school, talking to my friends, I realized that was quite unique. That's not normal in the sense of what's normal nowadays. He was always telling me I can be whatever I want to be. And he was always telling me, because keep in mind, I was coming from a patriarchal society. My grandfather kept telling me, you can be whatever you want to be. And as a woman, you always have to be independent and you always have to have your own money. And I didn't realize how revolutionary that was, coming from a man that was born during the Great Depression, coming from his type of upbringing. I was always saying, okay, as a woman, I can be whatever I want to be, check. I have to be financially independent. And he always said, you can do whatever you want to do, as long as you have the qualities for a particular position, as long as you bring in the best to the table with integrity. And he always said, with compassion.
That is awesome. That is huge from the perspective of everything you just said, right? From his upbringing, from the areas that you were living in, right through to what he shared with you. That is huge. Be independent and earn your own money. That is massive. Yeah. And so I'm loving it. And so having conversations with your family, with your grandfather is really important. I love it when you say, we went to school and then realized that wasn't normal. But
as a young kid, sometimes we're experiencing certain things in life thinking everyone else is experiencing those. And when I didn't realize how unique he was up until I started going to school.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. I love it. I think it's great. It's interesting you suggested your grandfather, because when we did the 200th episode, I was asked myself, I was interviewed as like you're being interviewed now, and I got someone to interview me and I was asked who was my favorite leader. And it said, it was actually two. It was my dad. It is my dad, and it was my grandfather. And because Greece is where I originate from, and yeah, it's really amazing. I love what your grandfather said to you. I think it's fantastic. Yeah, neighbors.
We're from the Balkans. We're neighbors.
Exactly. But I love what he said to you. That's brilliant. But also I love the fact that you've taken it and you've done something with it, which is really important. Now, the show here is called Leadership is Changing. When I mentioned that title of the show or that statement, what does that mean to you?
I think and it's not a cliche. During the times of COVID, we realized in order to be sustainable as far as a company or leaders, you have to drastically change, get yourself out of the comfort zone. Now, we were always talking about these comfort zones in the past, but I think that accelerated quite a bit in the last 2 years. And one of the Forbes publishers, Rich Colgard, who also serves on our Forbes board of advisors, he actually recorded the interviews with the top level CEOs within the United States. I actually built a class around those interviews. And these CEOs were saying where they were in January, February prior to COVID versus what happened to their companies and themselves March, April. If you're that kind of level of success and you don't get settled, some of you are being educated for the careers that don't exist at this point of time. By the time you graduate, you may go into a career path. I always remember my grandma telling me, I know you are a professor, and I know you're looking at that box. She was talking about laptop, but I'm so confused where your students are. So picture her world prior to modern technology. She's saying my granddaughter is a professor. Her students are somehow in her laptop. I'm not sure how that works. Make the long story short, you have students right now that 10 years from now, they will have careers that don't exist today. So you have to learn the core leadership skills to be adaptable. Some of the skills that were working for us through history, being adaptable, being courageous, being proactive, being hard worker, having your goals, but being able to adjust and change on a moment's notice.
Yep. I think those skills and that are built in cement. In other words, you're developing them and growing them, and that's the foundations. but the goals or the roles that you're doing are in sand, and they will move and adjust, and we need to be able to move with them in the times as well. Great. So we've heard about your grandfather, we've heard about your grandmother, which is pretty cool. And yeah, I love what you say. Get out of your comfort zone. Don't get settled. And I think that what I'm also seeing with a lot of CEOs that I'm talking to is that with the cycle we are in today, are we in the right business? Do we have the actual right organizational structure to support that? And do I have the right leadership team to help lead that, move that forward going? And it's really important to see that because a lot of them don't. And some of them have got their heads in the sand and they're not looking around, and they won't be around for much longer if they don't wake up and get on with it. So COVID has really rattled us and waking people up and taking things to a new level, which has been pretty cool.
Yeah, I don't believe in New Year's resolution. I'm actually get slightly annoyed by those. You have to consistently revamp yourself and create goals for yourself throughout the year.
Mm-hmm.
So don't have the calendar trigger your new set of goals, because usually we abandon those.
Yes.
But constantly work on I tell my kids, 1-year plan, 3-year plan, 5-year plan. My daughter's in high school. She's like, my 2-year plan is to finish high school. I said, what's afterwards? Stuff along those lines. And that's what I do. And, and sometimes some things I'm able to achieve. Sometimes some things we're not able to achieve. There are a lot of external factors as well. But as you work towards a particular goal, you may discover something else that you want to work on.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. Totally. And I think there's a quote that I always put out there on social media on the 2nd of January.
And Paul, I know that the show here is the name of the show called Leadership is Changing. What you've just been sharing there and about what people think about and what's going on inside of us and so forth. Leadership is changing. What does that mean to you when I say that statement, and how might you be saying it now? I think a lot of people are going to be struggling and their thoughts and tuning at the moment. What are your thoughts on that? I think it was Maxwell Maltz, the plastic surgeon, who wrote the phenomenal book in the 1960s that I know you're familiar with, Denis, Psycho-Cybernetics, where he says that a person never outperforms their own self-image. And boy, don't we see that in leadership today. We've got insecure leadership everywhere we look, and that insecurity shows up in their decisions or the lack thereof. It shows up in their character. We just never outperform our own self-image. And it's a shame because we have before us both the greatest opportunities and the greatest challenges. And, if we can get some leaders that could stand in their truth of who and whose they are, and who could stand for other people and guide the way, the world could be transformed into truly the utopia that I think we all know that we're capable of living in. We are, in fact, at any given time, our own worst enemy.
Yeah.
And it can be transformed. I mean, if these leaders, as I said in my introduction, that they can step up to be the leaders that we are, so they can be, then they can inspire things. They can inspire people, motivate them, but also take motivated people and inspire them even further. It'll be wonderful to see. And that's what the world needs, right? Yeah, well, I mean, we got to have leaders that have guts to break things, okay? Some things need to be broken, right? And there's two types of change. There's a cyclical change, and then there's structural change. And I think what we've got a lot of leaders that are trying to win a popularity contest. They don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to break things. So they're afraid of introducing structural change. But structural change is where all transformation takes place. We see cyclical change every single day. Turn on the stock market and you will watch the commodity prices, and based on the weather and based on oil, we will see commodity of beans and pork bellies and coffee. Those prices will incrementally change. It's cyclical. Seasonal even, almost predictable. Structural change, though, is a change that's introduced, but you don't get a vote if you participate in structural change. Like, we're not going back to the rotary saw and fax machine. If in the early 1900s, if Henry Ford would have asked the world what they wanted, the world would have said a faster horse, right? Not a combustion engine. But yes, we're not going back to the horse and buggies. And so we need to have the leaders that are willing to introduce the world to structural change. But structural change is scary because it's permanent. And if the leader is insecure and the leader lacks the character, who's going to follow them into structural change? Because it's structural change that we need. And looking the character of a leader, it's just, I'm thankful that there's a lot of leaders out there whereby they're surface-wise, they seem okay, but if you dig deeper, there's just empty. There's just not that character of a leader. Are you seeing that as well?
There's no depth. They're a mile wide and deep. They're afraid to stand for something. They stick their finger in their mouth and then up to the wind to see which way they should blow today. That's not leadership. That's not leadership. That's Gallup, the opinion poll company, right? And it's leadership by opinion. That's not what leadership is. That's not what leadership is. Leadership is the ability to identify the true best next step for mankind, and then a person who has the courage and the vision to cast that vision, put people right in the middle of the picture, let them see themselves in that change, and then lead. Not to lead by opinion poll and what everybody thinks. People are just so afraid to lead. They're so afraid to stand for something that they fall for anything.
Yeah. Stand for anything and fall for anything. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, they're so afraid to stand for something that they fall for anything.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.